We live in a world of choice. We have so many choices. Take, for example, that very important practice of buying chocolate. You walk into the SuperValu or the Maxwell garage and you get to that delicious counter and you see that beautiful tiered wall of chocolatey goodness. And you try to decide what chocolate you're going to have. Oh, you can have chocolate that's wrapped around lovely, crunchy, wafery, sugary, caramelly goodness. You can have chocolate with biscuit in it. You can have chocolate with raisins in it. You can have chocolate with raisins and biscuit in it. Plain chocolate with mint bits through it. Plain chocolate with Turkish delight. Plain chocolate with bits of yellow, sugary deliciousness. You don't even know what it is, but they call it golden crisp. So many chocolate choices. We're faced with choices all of the time. Now, if you're overwhelmed with your choice when it comes to chocolate, it must be quite overwhelming when you're trying to think about what belief system to live by. We all live by some sort of rules, some sort of ethic, some sort of belief system. So how are we going to choose the right one by which we live our lives by? Now, when you're choosing your favorite chocolate bar, you go for the one that suits your preferences best. But when you're choosing your belief system, it probably isn't a good idea to just go for the one that suits your preferences best. You don't just go for preference. You choose a belief system that makes most sense of the world around you. You choose the belief system that when you stack up all of the evidence of your intellect, of your emotions, when you think about ethics, you say which one of these belief systems is the one that is true, which is the one that weighs up all of the evidence around us and the one that makes most sense of this world that we live in. And as somebody who's a Christian pastor, what I would want to say is have you consider the question and have Christians continually ask themselves the question, well, why would you be a Christian? Suffice to say, if you're just going purely on pleasure and preference, there are easier ways to live than to be a Christian. For example, we know that Jesus said, "Come follow me." And he explained to his disciples what that might mean. Die to yourself. Even in this passage that we're looking at today in Matthew 20 in the Bible, Jesus says, whoever wants to be great needs to become a servant. It is not a fast track to success. Wouldn't it be easier to have a faith system where you can just change your beliefs depending on which society you live in or depending on how society and culture around you changes? Christianity follows a book, the Bible, and it finds how we're supposed to live and understands who God is and how we're supposed to follow him by what's written down in this book. We're not at liberty to change the message of Christianity. Wouldn't it be easier, for example, if you lived in a country where they said it's illegal to worship Jesus and would put you in prison if you worship Jesus, to be able to say, well, today I don't worship Jesus. Better for my safety. I'll avoid prison if I say I won't worship Jesus. So I'm just going to say worshiping Jesus isn't the right thing to do. Why would you do this? Why would you become a Christian, or why would you continue to be one? And the only answer is if you're convinced that the claims of Christianity, that the message, the news of Christianity is true, and it speaks about the reality of the world around us and what it is to be human. Maybe you think to yourself, well, don't all religions essentially say the same thing? Doesn't it matter? Why does it matter which particular one we follow? Can't I just choose one or the other? And of course, in a free society, you are completely at liberty to choose whichever religion you want to go after whichever belief system you want to live by. But not all belief systems are equal. In fact, belief systems often contradict each other. And I want us this morning, or this afternoon if you're in Balbriggan, to be thinking a little bit about why it is that you would choose Christianity and what are some claims of Christianity and a particular claim in Christianity that makes it stand out from all of the others. We get this in Matthew chapter 20, and I want to look at it. Jesus comes to this particular point and this claim in Christianity that he makes, and it comes at a time when a mother comes to talk to Jesus, and it's recorded, as I said, in Matthew chapter 20. The lead up to this truth claim comes when this mother of James and John comes to Jesus. Now, I don't know if any of your parents or your mom has ever gone into bat for you. I used to be mortified as a teenager about my mum, her boasting about us, her four boys. She'd boast about us. It used to absolutely mortify me. I went to Sweden once and I learned a couple of words of Swedish, and my mum was telling people, "Oh, Andy, he's nearly fluent in Swedish." I once, and for those of you who know me how surprising this is, got a positive comment from my music class in first year in secondary school. And after that positive comment. My mum was on her way to saying, well, Andy, it really could be something great in composition. Oh, I was absolutely mortified at the time. But I look back on it, actually, and it was just a reflection of her love for us and her positive way of looking at her kids. So this mother approaches Jesus, and she wants to speak to him about her sons, and she wants a special place for them in his kingdom. She's like an Irish mammy. She'll do whatever it takes for the sake of her children. You know the old joke, how many Irish mammies does it take to change a light bulb? Listen, don't you worry about me. You go out there and enjoy yourself, and I'll sit here in the dark, just so long as you're having a good time. This mother wants the best for her children. These two friends of Jesus are two of his disciples. They're James and John. In fact, they're two of Jesus' closest friends. Now, Jesus' very closest friend is Peter, but then you often hear of Jesus being with Peter, James, and John. Now, in chapter 19 of Matthew, we read that Jesus kind of rebukes Peter there. And it could be that James and John's mother has got word of this, and so she wants to come to Jesus, and because she thinks that maybe there's an opportunity, an opening for being Jesus' closest friend or best friend. She says, as we see at verse 20 there, in chapter 20, that she comes, she wants a favor of Jesus. He asks what it is that you want at verse 21. And she says, will you in your kingdom have it so that one of my sons sits on your right and the other son sits on your left? Give them the best place in your kingdom. She comes politely, she kneels down, and she asks this of Jesus. She wants a special position for her boys. She's thinking like a good businesswoman would, or any experienced operator. There's an opportunity that's arisen, and she wants to grasp it. She recognizes Jesus' power and authority, and she wants some of it for her family. In many ways, that's so understandable. You'll see at verse 24, the other 10 disciples hear about this approach by James and John's mother, and they are indignant with the two brothers. And you think to yourself, well, maybe they're indignant because they recognize how inappropriate this is. They recognize more fully or in some sort of holy way how Jesus operates. But it almost certainly isn't that. We know that from Jesus' reaction. They really think that, why didn't we not think about this before? Others have tried to get ahead of us, and they're indignant because of it. Jesus' answer, though, tells us something about this key claim of Christianity, about the nature of how the kingdom works, but also the nature of the reason for Jesus coming, and a key claim at the very heart of Christianity that defines it from all other major religions. You see, what Jesus explains is that they've got the kingdom inside out. The disciples, James and John, and their mother, they've got the kingdom upside down. They've misunderstood how Jesus works. Here we get a key insight into this core teaching of Christianity that appears in no other religion. Verse 28, Jesus says this, "The Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many." You see, this is an upside-down, paradoxical kingdom that Matthew has been introducing us to. How do we become great in the kingdom? Not the way the world around us does. Not in the way the world around us appreciates rewards and efforts. Most of the systems that we're judged by measure greatness by what you can do and what you can achieve. We try to curry favor, just in the same way this mother was doing. For those we try to curry this favor from those we want to impress. And we do that currying of favor by showing what we can do. Look at my work. Look at my results. Don't you know what I got in my leaving cert? Can't you see my sales figures? I was watching a comedian, an American comedian, and she was doing her first ever live Netflix special. And the program begins, and it's her walking out onto stage to rapturous applause. And the crowd are going crazy, and they're clapping and clapping, and she just walks up very quietly, and the audience hushes down into silence, and she comes to the microphone. And she just looks up at the crowd, and she smiles wryly, and she looks out and she says, "I really hope my ex-boyfriend watches this." And you can understand her feeling. She's operating in the way of the world. We want people to notice our successes. If there's people we want to impress, we want them to see us at our very best. Who are you trying to impress? How are you trying to impress them? We learn from Jesus here that the way of the kingdom is not the same as the way of the world. Jesus has alluded to this in verses 17 to 20. The disciples and him are on their way to Jerusalem. And Jesus explains to them, when we go to Jerusalem, something very bad is going to happen. We're going to go to Jerusalem, verse 18, and the Son of Man, that's Jesus, will be delivered over to the chief priests and the teachers of the law. They'll condemn him to death and will hand him over to the Gentiles to be mocked and flogged and crucified. What? What kind of king, what kind of redeemer, what kind of Messiah is going to be handed over and killed and crucified? How is this possible? This is the upside down kingdom. Jesus is going to Jerusalem for the decisive move in the battle against sin. But his kingdom doesn't operate in the normal ways. What is that move? Well, it's the one that he describes at verse 28. He's going to give up his life as a ransom for many. There it is. Possibly the single most defining belief in Christianity. How is Christianity different to all of the other religions? It says that God became a man, and he wasn't a conquering warrior as people expected or you might think, but he comes to give his life as a ransom for many. This giving of his life for a ransom is going to be the decisive blow in the battle for our freedom. But what does it mean that Jesus pays his death as a ransom? Well, you pay a ransom, don't you, in order to free somebody who's in captivity. What the Bible tells us is that we are all captive to sin, that there's a chasm between us and God. Sin has us in chains, and it means that we are not free by our nature to enjoy God now or to enjoy God in eternity and forever. And natural justice means that there has to be some sort of price paid for sin. There has to be something that's made up for it. If we do things wrong, we've got to atone for it, or there's got to be some sort of atonement for it. And what Jesus is describing is him paying the price for our sin. There's an extraordinary human example of this that maybe might help you to understand it. It's quite well known. You may have heard it before. There was a Catholic priest in Auschwitz, the concentration camp run by the Nazis. He was called Maximilian Krobe. And at the time he was there, a prisoner tried to escape from the prison. He was captured trying to escape. And because he tried to escape, the Nazis said 10 people have to die because of what's happened. And one of the people who was going to die was a man called Francis Gałdzieniczek. He was a Polish man. I hope I've got that right. And he was among those who was ordered that they were going to die. The priest heard him one night weeping and crying over what was about to happen. The priest was an older man. He didn't, like this other man, have a wife and kids. And he said to the Nazis, to the SS, "Take my life instead of his. Let me be his substitute." And the Nazis accepted this substitution. And this man was free to go. And the Catholic priest Krobe was killed instead. It's a substitutionary atonement. And that's how the Bible describes what Jesus was doing when he came to the world. Unlike any other belief system, it says that God became a man to pay the price for us. Different ways the New Testament puts it. Galatians 2:20 says, "The Son of God who loved me and gave himself up for me," describing Jesus. Paul says elsewhere in 1 Timothy 2:6 that Jesus gave himself as a ransom for all, taking up this phrase. Titus 2:14, Paul again says that Jesus gave himself for us to redeem us from every lawless deed, to redeem us from our sin, and to purify for himself a people for his own possession. He pays this price so that he can have a people who are pure and can be with God forever and be in heaven in purity. 1 John 3:16 says, "We know love by this, that he, Jesus Christ, laid down his life for us." Jesus himself says, "I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep." Romans 5:6, Paul writes, "While we were still helpless, at the right time, Christ died for the ungodly." Christ comes for people who can't do it themselves, for people who can't get themselves sorted, who don't have the power and the tools to make it into heaven. That's everybody. Isaiah 53:4 was written hundreds of years before Jesus came, but it spoke of the one who would come and be the Redeemer, be the one that was God on the earth. And he said, "Surely our griefs he himself bore." This is the central claim of Christianity, that God became a man in the flesh, in the person of Jesus Christ. And he came not to be this victorious warrior when he first comes, but he came to die and give his life as a ransom for many. One of the most significant implications for this is for me and for you when we ask ourselves, have I done enough? One of the things that this helps us to grasp, and I hope you can grasp today and always, is that Jesus' action and work is complete. You know those crime shows where someone ends up being in the payroll or working for the crime lords and the big bosses, and they give their money or their service as part of these gangs, and maybe they want to be released from it, but whatever they owe to these crime lords, it's never enough, is it? There's always more money to be paid, more awful acts to commit to satisfy these mob bosses. Where I lived in Northern Ireland, where I was training to be an assistant minister, there was a very significant paramilitary presence in the town. And in one of the big estates there, they controlled people's lives, essentially. Virtually every young man was expected to work for them, at least be at their beck and call. And it was almost impossible to be free from them. There was only two ways you could be free. You could either die or you could get religion. And they were the only ways that you could be freed. They were impossible to satisfy. They always wanted more and more and more. Have you ever asked yourself, have you done enough? Have you done enough? Are you doing well enough to be considered okay in God's eyes? And what's amazing is the last words that John records Jesus saying, just before Jesus gave up his spirit and breathed his last. And Jesus utters these extraordinary words, and he says, "It is finished." And as Jesus is saying that, he's saying the ransom has been paid. The debt is cancelled for those who are mine. It is finished. Many other religions say that we're made okay with God by doing our religious best, our moral best. In many of the Eastern religions, it's based on something called karma. You strive for a moral life in a hope that your good works outweigh your bad works, that you'll be reincarnated and you'll do better in the next life. Can you imagine what that's like? Saying to yourself constantly, am I doing enough? Have I been good enough this week or this month or in this lifetime to move up the ladder? How good do I have to be? What about the stuff I've taught? What about the things people don't see? Or what if the religion that you practice or the belief system you live by, God rewards you with heaven by your performance? Have I prayed enough? Have I asked for forgiveness in the right way? Have I participated in the right sacrifices? You never know whether you've done enough. Only Christianity says that God has paid the sacrifice himself. You don't have to worry whether you've done enough. Here in Ireland, for a lot of people, Christianity boils down to just being a good person. People say, well, I've done my best. Have you done your best? Do you always do your best? Of course you don't. Of course you don't. Be honest. If you're like me, you're addicted to serving yourself, addicted to putting yourself first. And Jesus comes and he pays the ransom so that those who are in that position, which is all of us, are free because he pays it because we can't. That's what it is to live in this freedom of Christ. This is the key claim of Christianity. And then we get involved, and hopefully what happens is you say, yeah, I believe that. I've come to believe that this claim of Jesus is true, and I'm going to live by this. And the question is, well, how are we going to live in this kingdom? And what does it mean to be successful in this kingdom? And Jesus says, well, although my death for you is more than a good example because it achieves the most important thing for you, your liberation, your forgiveness, your freedom. But now you go and you live this way in the kingdom. So verse 26, 27, for example, Jesus says, so not with you. Don't live like the world, Jesus says. Instead, whoever wants to be great among you must be your servant. Whoever wants to be first, be your slave. What's the greatest sign of a church community, of Christians living the way they're supposed to? Is it good music? Maybe biblical teaching, warm atmosphere, nice coffee, charitable giving, a colourful website, all of those things. It's none of those things. It's servant-hearted Christians. Christians who are each other's servants. Followers of Jesus who are willing to give themselves for the sake of others. I said at the beginning that there are easier ways to live than be a Christian, but there's no better way to live. There's no other major belief system in the world that points back to a historical person whose closest friends and hundreds of others who knew him came to believe was God on the earth. No other religion says that God paid a ransom for many, that he came not to be served, but to serve for the sake of your liberation and eternal comfort and security. Jesus Christ died for your sake, and he lives so that you might be free from sin to enjoy God forever. He became a servant for your sake. It is finished. The debt is cancelled for those who trust in him. Go, be free, serve God, and serve each other.